So after doing the Nosis video, I decided to go back and refresh myself on Dottore's history. In light of the reveals in Fontaine, we've received information I thought could expand our understanding of past events. Sumeru's Archon quest left us with many questions still unanswered, and Dottore, most notably, holds some of the story's greatest secrets. In this video, I'll be covering one of those lucrative secrets, and if I can't figure it out, then hopefully I can at least narrow it down for some of you. So, let's begin. Dottore, also known as the Doctor, is the second of the Fatui Harbingers, and much to the dismay of the academia, perhaps the greatest scientist in Teyvat. Although he has a long history of horrific crimes which I don't think needs much reminder for anybody watching this video. Just as much as he is evil, though, he is also highly knowledgeable and likely has knowledge on the world's greatest secrets. In this sense, he's one of the most valuable characters in the story, because there's no telling how deep his knowledge goes. There's two main questions that I'm interested in covering in these videos. First is the elephant in the room. The skies of Teyvat are fake. What did he tell Nahida in that fateful conversation? Second, what is the true purpose behind his Nosis experiment in Sumeru? Drafting the script for this topic, I've come to realize that together, these questions are too great to cover in one video, so for this one I'll solely cover the mystery of the Nosis experiment. And I might be alone on this, but the longer time passes, the more suspicious this whole experiment becomes. We'll expand on this shortly. When Dottore confronted Nahida in the sanctuary, they had this exchange.
If the experiment succeeded, you would have had a new god on your hands. How would you have faced your own god then?
I'm first and foremost a scholar. These results should be left to the judgment of the hypothetical me confronted with that outcome. But you're right. And that's exactly why I'm disappointed with the conclusion of this experiment.
Now, this statement is all well and good if you fully understood the context behind it, but that's just the thing. They don't actually give us the full context. We only have a vague idea on the true purpose of this experiment. Transform Scaramouche into a god, replace Nahida, and install a new god of wisdom in Sumeru. But in truth, these goals don't really make much sense upon further examination. So, what part of it exactly doesn't make sense? Well, let's address the boy Scaramouche himself. You've seen his feelings throughout Sumeru.
Anything but the Nosis! That's mine! Don't even try! I'll never go back!
Yeah, that happened. It's pretty obvious that there's absolutely zero chance this guy would just peacefully surrender the Electro-Gnosis. He's just not. There's no way he'd give up his godhood for the Tsaritsa. It's clear that Scaramouche's godhood depends on his Gnosis, and, well, the Tsaritsa kinda wants all of the Gnoses, so we'd have a conflict of interest here. Then there's the issue with the seats of the Seven. We've learned in Fontaine that the 7 seats of the Archons aren't so easily manipulated. When Nahida called him the false god, it's taken on quite a literal meaning now because Nahida would still be the Dendro Archon anyway. I don't think killing her was in the cards. Of course, the goal was not to destroy the Dendro Archon's divine seat either. Dottore doesn't know what would awaken the heavenly principles, and there's no indication that the Fatui would have anything to gain from restoring Apep's Dendro authority. At least not that we know of. So, we've established that all the implied goals for the experiment don't make much sense logically. We know for a fact the other Fatui were in on the plan. Dottore spoke openly about Scaramouche in the Harbingers meeting, which meant that neither he nor the other Harbingers were all that worried about Scaramouche. So, this is where we reach an impasse. It doesn't make much sense for this experiment's goals to just turn Scaramouche into the new god of Sumeru. It doesn't make much sense for him to somehow become the new Dendro Archon. This experiment was also authorized by the rest of the Fatui, seeing as there was no evidence of opposition despite being informed on the matter. So, what's the true goal? Now, I don't imagine most people to share my curiosity on this question, but I do think I have a compelling answer you'll be interested in hearing. This does have implications for the future of the story, so stay tuned. The Scaramouche experiment can be broken down into 3 stages. First, integrating the Electro-Gnosis, creating a vessel which to fully harness the Electro-Gnosis' power. Of course, Scaramouche was built just for this purpose. Once the seal behind his full functions were lifted, this stage would be complete. Second, compiling a large number of dreams through the Akasha. Now that Fontaine is fully released, we've learned the truth about the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinale and the true power of Indemnitium. It would be fair to assume that the Akasha harvested dreams of Sumeru would serve a similar purpose, as they are both power derived from the people. And lastly, the accumulation of the Divine Knowledge capsules. The plan was to merge the accumulated fragments of Divine Knowledge, namely Rukkhadevata's consciousness tainted with forbidden knowledge, into Scaramouche. Now, just looking at this right off the bat, Stage 1 served an important purpose that we all fully understand, that of harnessing power. But it's not quite obvious why the experiment involved harvesting the people's dreams and pumping Scaramouche with divine knowledge. Knowing what we know now about forbidden knowledge, it probably would have just ruined Scaramouche as it did Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, so why? As for the matter of the Samsara, you can't really argue that those dreams were necessary to turn him into a god. Kuni Kazushi, the puppet, was already a successful creation. If A really wanted, Scaramouche could have just absorbed the Electro-Gnosis in Inazuma and became the Raiden Shogun from day one. That only leaves us with one confirmed motive for the experiment, making Scaramouche really strong. And obviously, since there's more to it than that, this is where we need to decipher the true motives. The motives behind the decision to milk the Sub-Zero Samsara, and the motives for concentrating all that forbidden knowledge into one place. To understand the true motives behind this experiment, we need to go back to the very beginning, to the Elazar trials at the Dar al-Shifa hospital. It is possible to use to control the elemental content of a person's body without relying on elemental power. There is potential for weaponization. Discussions of research on have to be increased in the future. Humans have unlimited potential. It may be foolish of me as a researcher to write this, but with enough input, I may be able to reach the level of a god. Or so people might call it. So, there's a lot of interesting information in the Elazar Hospital notes. Go check them out yourself to fully understand the context. Long story short, it's heavily implied that Dottore is the narrator here, but even if not, these experiments are very similar in nature to what happened with Kale. From the Genshin webcomic, Kale was also an Elazar patient and an escaped test subject of Dottore. During the experiments, Dottore injected a substance known as Archon residue, or God's remains as it's called now. Dottore managed to successfully stabilize Kale's condition, but more importantly, she obtained this power. The power of dark flames through a strange black serpent. This power was so strong that it had the potential to overpower even Kaya in a fight. Thus it becomes clear, Elazar itself was valuable to Dottore at the time because it appears to be a gateway towards access to greater powers. However, it's important to note that this line of research was ultimately abandoned. Kale and a group of other children escaped the labs, but Dottore had no interest in taking them back. Dottore didn't abandon the pursuit entirely though, he merely decided to continue the experiment through a higher form, and that is through Rukkhadevata's divine knowledge. We're aware from Neuvlet's story that the Dragon King, with his forbidden knowledge, had dealt a great blow to the heavens at the time. Raw forbidden knowledge, thus it can be inferred, is more potent than its watered-down manifestation of Elazar. And one of the main points from the Elazar research notes was the effect it had on the host's elemental energy. Physician's note: all specimens have one thing in common. Body elemental quantities were at abnormally high levels and were positively correlated with the severity of the disease. After the experiment, body elemental quantities were reduced and samples self-reported a reduction in symptoms. It is reasonable to hypothesize that there is a causal relationship between elemental quantities and Elazar. More controlled trials should be conducted to exclude redundant variables. Note: the enrichment process of elemental quantities in humans may be dynamically sustained. Dynamically sustaining a host's elemental quantity. This line right here actually could explain something about Scaramouche. So, throughout the fight, have you ever wondered how Scaramouche was able to use all these different elements simultaneously?
To dominate!
You know, I find it kind of crazy that he's able to use 5 elements all at the same time. Now, getting all that power is not easy. The only other example I can think of is Ajdaha and the Primogeo Bishop, and the bishops themselves are a special case because they're a part of the Light Realm or the Elemental Realm. And we know Scaramouche is not a bishop. Where do you think that power is coming from? The Electro-Gnosis? The Samsara accumulated dreams? I mean, in theory, Scaramouche with just the Electro-Gnosis ability-wise is effectively the Magatsumitake Narukami no Mikoto. In other words, all Electro. All signs point to the Elazar research notes. Whatever Dottore learned from these experiments, it was all foreshadowing. Saying he can manipulate elemental quantities and one day reach the level of a god, and then creating a god who can utilize different elements. And since Elazar is a direct product of forbidden knowledge, Dottore might have experimented with forbidden knowledge to make this happen. But if that's not convincing enough, let's take this a step further, shall we? Let's talk about Hypatia, the mad scholar NPC we all know and love, I think. Hypatia is an alleged genius amongst the scholars of Sumeru who spend their entire lives communicating with Irminsul. And as we all know, Hypatia was the first person to connect to Scaramouche's memories. Now we know for a fact the scholars seek out the Irminsul for the Dendro Archon's divine wisdom, and this particular scholar, who intended to reach Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, instead reached Scaramouche. Now, I don't know about you, but that's as obvious of a sign as any that Scaramouche has already absorbed some degree of divine knowledge. So hypothetically speaking, if Scaramouche somehow managed to absorb all the forbidden knowledge without going insane, more scholars are going to end up like Hypatia and find him in the Irminsul. Now obviously forbidden knowledge is an incredibly dangerous substance and well, it would be suicide to take all of it in. You can't just expect to wield raw forbidden knowledge just like that. Because we know how well it ended for the Dragon King, and King Deshret, and Conria. But Dottore, this madman, a mere human, elevated himself from human to Harbinger to a god-tier enemy. No, he's being more careful about this. He has a plan. He's going to go about this slowly and methodically, which brings us to the next point of interest, the Sub-Zero Samsara and the extracted dreams. This part is actually quite straightforward. The dreams compiled by the Akasha serve 2 main purposes. One, it's compiled wisdom. In other words, direct power from the Dendro Archon. Which, well, the exact function isn't clear, but one can consider it a manifestation of power similar to that of Indemnitium in Fontaine. Second, and this is the most important one, the ability to purge forbidden knowledge. Greater Lord Rukkhadevata created the Akasha precisely to serve this purpose. Now, the one thing Dottore and Scaramouche didn't have on their side was time. Dottore's project could only start after Scaramouche arrived in Sumeru with the Nosis. This was why the Samsara went on for so long. They needed to harvest as many dreams in as short of a time as possible. So they managed to harvest 168 days worth of dreams from everyone in Sumeru City at minimum, which is not even half a year's worth. Of course, they could in theory still harvest dreams without the Samsara since days still go on as normal, but even then it's likely not enough. Rukkhadevata likely had multiple years or even decades to collect and harvest the dreams. I would surmise that this is why we see some evidence that Scaramouche has received divine knowledge, because he would have the means to contain them to a degree. We then arrive at the part where Scaramouche battles the Traveler and attempts to take Nahida's Gnosis 168 times. One could easily interpret this action as simply Scaramouche taking the Dendro Gnosis for the Tsaritsa, but, you know, it would feel kind of weird to me that Scaramouche would consider himself a god, consider himself superior to Nahida, consider Dottore a lowly human, and still be a loyal follower of the Tsaritsa, knowing his views of loyalty and betrayal. Heck, he even discarded the name of the Balladeer prior to our fight. Come on, I have a better explanation for why he took the Dendro Gnosis. It's because of this line right here.
We used the power of two Nosis to successfully connect with the Irminsul consciousness from 500 years ago. Then, we removed the remaining pollution from Irminsul.
You could say this was Dottore's backup plan. Since the dream quantity Dottore could harvest was limited, it stands to reason that Scaramouche would need the help of another tool, a second Gnosis to contain the forbidden knowledge. So to put it simply, the Gnosis and the dreams are insulators of forbidden knowledge. Forbidden knowledge, as we know, contain immense potential to reach the level of a god from the Elazar research notes, and several powerful factions in the past have tried and failed to weaponize it. Dottore likely wanted to spawn some sort of eldritch power similar to Kali's Black Flames, which, I mean, considering how much power was drawn out of her, using God Scaramouche as the base would be, on paper, exponentially stronger. You could even go a step further and use this explanation as the plan for all 7 Nosis, but I won't get ahead of myself here. That's a topic I am not qualified to talk about right now. So, we're arriving at the end of this crazy mega theory, but there's still one final question to address. What was the plan after all of this came to fruition? If Scaramouche was to use 2 Nosis to awaken some abyssal power of forbidden knowledge, then there's no chance he'll voluntarily give up the Nosis to anybody. And well, I'd say Dottore had a plan to eliminate Scaramouche once the results of the experiment went through. Dottore has a habit of valuing information and research data more than any tangible product of the experiments themselves. He did not care about Kali's group escaping the lab, and if you assume the unknown doctor in the Elazar research notes was Dottore, he didn't care about Abbas escaping either. Now, the sages were aware of this risk. They were the ones who created a backup of Scaramouche's memory. It's funny because in an alternate universe where Dottore was the one to get rid of Scaramouche and erase him from Irminsul, he'd be able to easily reclaim Scaramouche's memories for the Fatui. I think the key was in the divine knowledge capsules that didn't make it to Scaramouche. There is a breaking point for how much forbidden knowledge Scaramouche could take. If that point is reached, Dottore could eliminate Scaramouche and secure the Nosis for the Fatui. The data is the most important part after all. Trading the life of a rebellious harbinger would be worth the results of this twisted experiment. Wait a minute, the sages preserved his memories mid-experiment?
This memory was extracted from him by the scholars. That's why they backed up his memory for later use.
Who's to say that Dottore didn't make a backup himself? What if Dottore was to use Scaramouche all along as a vessel of forbidden knowledge, and if it got ugly, then Dottore had a plan to erase him from Irminsul and keep the memories? Actually, who's to say that Dottore doesn't already have a copy of his own just like Nahida? We may end up with a situation where Dottore remembers all the details of this experiment, where he still knows everything about Scaramouche. Okay, think about it this way. Erasing Scaramouche messes with Dottore's experimental data. If we assume that Dottore knows about the Irminsul's memory erasure, which is very likely, he sure as well would need to preserve those experiment records with a backup. Scaramouche's disappearance completely screws up the entire experiment, and I doubt Dottore would allow his data to be tampered with. I think Dottore still remembers everything. He has to, or else that experiment data would have been lost. Side tangent aside, ultimately I think the experiment failed because Scaramouche couldn't take the Dendronosis to launch the next phase of the experiment. Dottore might have also been dissatisfied at the relative firepower of Scaramouche gained through the Harvested Dreams and Forbidden Knowledge, so you could say there were some performance issues only he would know. Also, these experiments are ultimately a lower priority than just collecting the Nosis straight up. If one really wanted to get Forbidden Knowledge, well, they're at the bottom of the abyss. There's no rush now that the Dendronosis is secured, and besides, the more resources you have, the better. There will be more opportunities in the future. So, that's my take on the Scaramouche God Experiment. In summary, it's not merely to make Scaramouche a super strong god through the Electronosis, it was also an extension of the Elazar research experiments of the past. Manipulating elemental quantities, creating something that could surpass gods using forbidden knowledge, but done in a very careful and controlled manner. Something went wrong partway through, and Scaramouche likely didn't check the boxes needed to meet Dottore's expectations, so he decided to clean up and leave. Now, there are a few holes in this mega theory. Most notably, Nahida specifically said that she doesn't sense the same divinity as Rukkhadevata in Scaramouche. This seems to imply that Scaramouche never consumed a single divine knowledge capsule. There's also the possibility that there was something else at play with Hypatia's connection, although Scaramouche calls her his first follower, implying more people will reach him in the same way. For his boss battle, if there's any hidden science behind why Scaramouche was able to utilize multiple elements at the same time without the use of divine knowledge, it would also make my theory look a little silly. Of course, I know there's probably somebody out there who will point out something I didn't know prior to finishing this video. I do appreciate any feedback because Genshin lore can be quite tricky to collect sometimes. We also don't know how the Burning Irminsul fits into all of this. What really is Dottore's experiment in blasphemy? Was it a separate experiment, or was it a part of this one? As of now, I don't think Dottore was going to get Scaramouche to burn down the Irminsul. Actually, that scene will likely be better addressed in my theory about what is the secret Dottore shared with Nahida, which is in progress. So, thanks for watching this video. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. I took a lot of time and effort to make this one. I changed the script multiple times because I kept discovering new information that would change my theory a little bit, so that's the reason I took this long. Thank you all for supporting the channel, and as always, I'll see you all in the next video.